Brain Damaged, 2-minute warning for parents. Chapter 1 by Tiffani Bright. As life happens, you have no idea what thoughts or conversations will end up holding enormous meaning after the death of a loved one. No dying. Unsettling laughs filled the air, though they seemed to mean nothing at the time. It wouldn't be long before I'd know how much the words would ring true, or how often I'd think back on it. I love you. I'll see you next time. I love you too. Last sentiments are easy to attach meaning to when they seem to be merely a coincidence. No dying. Paul hopped on his green donor cycle that he'd been so proud of fixing up himself. He put on his helmet that cost more than he paid for the bike. He's being smart about having good equipment at least, I thought. One last nod, and off down Burbank Boulevard he went. They say hindsight is 20/20, but sometimes we're seeing so clearly in the moment and simply don't act. I knew Paul could be another crash statistic. I knew he could become a quadriplegic. I knew he could become one of the many motorcyclists who became spare parts for someone in the need of a new liver or kidney. I knew the dangers, and yet all I said was, no dying. In the months after Paul's death, I kept a note on my phone so that every time I had a memory of my brother, I could jot it down, no matter how insignificant. There was the last time we spoke, or watching the movie Rudy too many times to count, or Paul attempting to unsuccessfully sing in tune in the car on our way to class. There was an overwhelming fear that someday I wouldn't be able to picture his smile or hear his laugh. How do I make sure he doesn't just become a name in stories we tell, a lost spirit of the past? Someone asked me now about something Paul said or did that I can't remember, and my breath gets stuck in my throat, my body tenses, my brain freezes. I should know this. I should remember this. How can I not remember this? I had no idea. I should have been making mental notes of our conversations about CTE and football. 5 months before the fatal motorcycle accident that ended Paul's life, the idea that Paul was exposed to brain damage from football made its way into the conversation. Paul met me at Mom's house to help retrieve some miscellaneous item from the attic while she was out of town for the White House Summit on Concussions. On a recent trip to a sports equipment standards meeting in Indianapolis, she was interviewed by a television reporter about the lack of use standard for football helmets. A small comment referring to my brother stood out. How could it be that my son took more hits than a Hall of Famer? Paul was excited that Mom talked about him on TV. I told him I thought he could have CTE, not that he was so depressed that he was going to kill himself tomorrow, but that he was slowly beginning to show some effects of brain trauma. The exact words of our conversation have escaped me now, but I won't forget that after we talked, we both thought that while he might not have CTE, there was definitely a chance he did. At 14 years old, my brother, Paul Bright Jr., stood a mere 5'2" and weighed 108 pounds. As kids, we were taught we could be anything we dreamed. Paul dreamed his future career would be as an NFL player. Never mind statistics that indicate otherwise. Every game night, Paul would head out onto the field with such passion. He may not have been the biggest player, but he played with the biggest heart. He had a sincere love for the game and his football family. If he were still with us, even knowing he had CTE and other brain damage, he'd still love football. Our parents divorced when I was 2 and Paul was still a baby. When we grew older, he went to live with Dad, so my brother and I spent the school year separated. Summer vacations we spent together, split between each parent. First, Paul would come to mom's for 6 weeks, while the last 6 weeks we'd always stayed with dad to make sure Paul wouldn't miss the start of football season. He started Pop Warner football in first grade at the age of 7 and played every season but one through his freshman year of high school. Eat, sleep, football, repeat. It's the routine for those who live and breathe football. Youth sports had been a way of life at Dad's house. Each year, all of my brothers played every season of football, basketball, baseball, and later wrestling. Every summer, 5 days a week for 2 hours, I watched as my brother tackled and got tackled in an attempt to reach Pop Warner's version of the Super Bowl in Orlando, Florida. I'd sit on the sidelines watching as these little warriors, these tiny heads poking up out of bulky shoulder pads, lined up for stretching and warm ups. They'd split up into offense and defense, off to learn drills, new plays, and how to hit. At home, my brothers practiced together in the backyard. Paul would even write out his own plays on lined paper and give them to his coach. Thanksgiving vacation was sometimes interrupted, depending on if one of my brother's teams made it to regionals. If they did, it meant leaving our home in Reno, Nevada to face one of the California teams. The other team always seemed to have a bigger team, bigger players, and nicer equipment. We always had heart and grit. One of the occasions Paul's team made it to regionals, we drove to see him play. Bundled in scarves and pocket warmers, we sat on frosty metal bleachers, ready to cheer for the unlikely victory. The team huddled up. Coach Jesse yelled, "Who are we going to play?" "Who cares?" the team shouted back. They were true underdogs, playing with determination and hustle. In Paul's first home high school game, he was so pumped for the season to start. Mom and I traveled to Reno from Oregon to watch as he started the next phase of his football life. Friday night lights blasted down to the field. Paul stood at the end of the line of players furthest from us. He stuck out like a sore thumb. He wouldn't hit his growth spurts until after he left the game. He was at least a full head shorter than the rest of the players. The national anthem rang through the stadium. The kickoff started the game, and the minutes ticked down. The halftime show came and went. The fourth quarter was coming to an end, and Paul had yet to even be put in for a single play. His team won by 11 points, and though he tried to hide it, the disappointment could be seen on Paul's face from across the field. That freshman season of little opportunity on the field led to Paul quitting football. At 6'1" and 195 pounds, in his senior year, we joked that all those years he did play, he was tiny, and now that he was finally bigger, he didn't want to play anymore. There was not even a second thought that after my brother died, that his brain would be donated to determine if he had suffered brain damage. For the previous 5 years, Paul watched as Mom and I tirelessly worked to bring awareness to youth sports safety. When I was in high school, I was at tumbling practice with my cheerleading team. Another girl was allowed to practice her back handspring on the tumble track at the same time I was completing my last flip. Playing on a backyard trampoline, even school children know you can create tension in the trampoline by bouncing right before another person, giving them extra height in their bounce. As I jumped backwards for the final time, my left arm hit the trampoline first, and a loud snap made everyone in the gym freeze. When my body finally managed to get back upright, my forearm looked like it had an extra elbow bending my wrist away from me. Mom dropped the pen she was using to sign a check for that month's membership fee and ran over to me. No one had a clue what to do. The mouths of the other athletes and coaches gaped open at the sight of my gruesome injury. There were no slings, no first aid kits, no emergency plans. Someone grabbed a piece of carpet and cut a strip to wrap around my arm. A rope found its way around my head and arm to create a sling as Mom picked me up and rushed me to the hospital. The incident started a journey of more than 10 years of fighting for the safety of children by Mom and me. After my injury, we started the National Chair Safety Foundation in 2008 to help bring awareness and better safety standards for cheerleaders. Early on, our collection of data was featured in the annual report for the National Center for Catastrophic Sports Injury Research. Our research showed the staggering amount of serious injuries occurring to high school and college cheerleaders across the country. After the annual report was published, it created a lot of media attention, with hundreds of stories produced by various news outlets, including People magazine and the Washington Post. Mom and I decided to enroll in paralegal classes to learn more about child athlete rights. Soon after, Paul moved to Southern California to live with Mom and me. Having recently graduated from high school, Paul wasn't sure what he wanted to do for the rest of his life. Still, he knew it was imperative that he go to school, so he signed up for some classes at the same school Mom and I were attending. Paul would help us whenever he could with the foundation. He volunteered at heart screenings, ran out for midnight snacks because we were pulling another all-nighter. One of the many things he undertook was to visit Patty with us. Mom was an expert for Patty's injury case, but as with a lot of cases, we became more than simply advocates for her. Patty suffered a form of cardiac arrest, commotio cordis. It was during an acrobatic maneuver with her cheerleading team. Oxygen deprivation to her brain resulted in an acquired brain injury, and Patty became a quadriplegic. She could only communicate with her eyes, one blink for yes, twice for no, three times for maybe. Paul never hesitated to take time out of his day to talk to Patty about new music or bring her new DVDs. During one of our paralegal classes, a teacher played the Aaron Brockovich movie. The story of Miss Brockovich fighting to bring down a power company polluting a city's water supply inspired us to write to the law firm Masri and Vitito, where Miss Brockovich worked, to see if they could help us. We thought it was a long shot, but they eventually wrote back. The relationship later led me to getting a job there and Mom becoming an expert in the concussion case against the NFL. During the concussion case, Mom took trips across the country, meeting with players about CTE and the effects of repetitive hits to the head. As a huge football fan, Paul wanted nothing more than to be by her side. There was an exuberance that came over him when he told people where Mom was or which player she had met that week. He couldn't wait for the chance to meet some of the players he'd grown up watching each Sunday. Both of us had our hearts set on going to the Super Bowl together, preferably in a year it wasn't in a city that was freezing. We thought there would be so many future opportunities. After one of her trips, Mom brought back a helmet manufactured by SG. She'd recently met with SG's owner, Bill Simpson, and he gave her a sample so players could see the difference between his helmets and those considered the industry standard. Paul walked out to her car to retrieve her luggage. She opened the trunk and handed the helmet to Paul. He immediately had that exuberance come over him. "Oh, yeah, if only I had worn this," he commented, grinning madly. He held it by the face mask, eagerly observing every angle as he turned it. The inner padding, the new material, the shiny new technology was sleek. In the days after Paul died, many people expressed vivid memories of his animated behavior when talking about what we were doing in sports. He was obsessed about us being involved in such a monumental thing happening in football. He was proud we were fighting for a good cause. When it came to his own job, Paul was a dedicated and hardworking employee. He had a passion for food that rivaled his childhood love of football. He moved up to be a manager at Creeka's Italian Deli not long after starting, By the time the owners decided to sell the deli and focus on their catering company, Humble Pie, Paul was a part of their family. Fulfilling a promise made earlier to train Paul to be a chef, they negotiated for Paul to transition with them if he stayed for a few months to help the new owner. He worked every day that he could, sometimes putting in 16-hour days for weeks at a time. He often missed family get togethers because he never wanted to take a day off. Paul was the kind of employee and person you could always count on. He wasn't just someone you could ask for favors. He went out of his way to be helpful. One of his coworkers was unfortunate enough to have his car break down at a time when he didn't have any savings to replace it. Paul offered to give him rides to and from work every day for several months. His coworker was undeniably grateful for the kindness Paul showed him. As children, our stepmom suffered from a parasite that fossilized in her brain and caused her to have seizures. Dad was a full-time member of the Air National Guard and went away on trips overseas for extended periods of time. As the oldest son, Paul took charge of helping our stepmom and looking out for his little brothers. At the age of 10, he learned what needed to be done when she was having a seizure, including giving her a shot of diazepam. As he grew up, that protection Paul showed for the women in his life was always a part of who he was. Because he was such a helper around the house, Paul had the skill of throwing together whatever ingredients we happened to have on hand and making it into a delicious meal. He loved the feeling he got from seeing people enjoy his food. He could always display a flash of smugness when he was showing off how great he could cook. He had a habit of calling to boast about the new celebrity he'd cook for that day. A memory that brings the biggest grin to my face is what he said after he prepared a meal for Jennifer Lopez. "I helped J-Lo keep her curves today," he said. "What are you talking about?" I replied. "She loved my creme brulee so much, she came back for seconds. She said it's the best she ever had." The last time we ever spoke, Paul was working at the site of a Pizza Hut commercial. He called to say how much Blake Shelton loved what he prepared for him. I could hear the smile in his voice as he described what he cooked. There was such excitement about having one of our favorite country artists go out of his way to compliment Paul's food. The call wasn't long, he was still at work, but he could barely contain his happiness. Some of those who've been found to have CTE, like Paul, have died being reckless, whether it's car accidents or drug overdoses. Early signs of CTE from brain injury can include sleep disturbances, impulse control issues, memory problems, lapses in judgment, and headaches. But the symptoms of brain injury and stage 1 CTE are often not glaringly obvious in such an early part of the disease. Sometimes symptoms seem to mask themselves within someone's personality. That's the difficult part when you don't know you have brain damage. You don't understand what's wrong. Looking back at one of the last times I saw him, there were red flags. He called to tell me he bought a used motorcycle off some guy who was selling it because he had already had the unfortunate experience of falling off of it. Red flag. Paul had no fear, no idea that he would experience the same thing. He had such pride in his voice as he described all the things he was going to fix, doing it with his own two hands. The bike needed a lot of work: a new body, new seats, new brake lines, new headlights. He couldn't wait to start riding it. When he brought it over for the first time, Paul pulled up in front of my house with a beat up looking bike. He hadn't taken the motorcycle class to get his license. Red flag. He hadn't gotten insurance for it. Red flag. Yet here he was, taking off his helmet to reveal a huge grin. He hopped off and went right into describing the bike, what he had done so far, what else he needed to complete. "Mom doesn't know I bought it, and I'm not going to tell her," he said. Red flag. "Well, yeah," I said. she'd come find it and throw it off a bridge. Sticking together, as siblings do, I had no intention of telling on him. He told just about everyone he knew that he bought it, and the news was met with the same reluctant nervousness from each of us. But Mom was the only one who would have blatantly taken action to make sure he didn't write it, and he knew that. My own anxiety was not calmed when he noticed a long cord dangling from the back of the bike. Red flag. My already worried mind immediately jumped to him speeding down the street and the brakes not working. Paul was undeterred. He said he'd let us know he made it back to his place safely. Luckily, he did. A few weeks later, I was visiting my boyfriend's family for the 4th of July weekend when I got a text from Mom because she couldn't get a hold of Paul. I silently freaked out. She still didn't know about the motorcycle. I called and texted him, but hours went by with no response. I was in a panic. We didn't know where Paul was and didn't have contact information for the people he recently moved in with. I asked him in a text to at least let us know that he was alive. A little after midnight, I finally received, "I'm fine." All the anxiety melted away. As different things occurred in Paul's life, we didn't think they were signals that would later flash in our minds as risky and reckless behavior. That dedication for his job didn't always transfer to other areas of his life. On Paul's 21st birthday, he was giving a friend a ride home and was pulled over. He admitted to the police that he'd smoked marijuana earlier in the day and he was cited with the DUI. When it came time to go to court, Paul was inconsistent with his appearances, even though the charges had been changed to a wet and reckless. Multiple times, this resulted in warrants for his arrest. Paul barely played football in high school. He never played in college or the NFL. My brother wasn't suicidal. He didn't suffer from depression, or at least he never shared with any of us. He never had a diagnosed brain injury in the 9 years he played. He did, however, suffer from painful migraines for most of his life. By middle school, his knees were already suffering from overuse. He'd have me walk on his back to help ease his lower back pain. He used prescription marijuana regularly to help with his difficulty falling asleep. With all of this, how could his brain be in proper working order? The knowledge that came with Mom being a brain injury survivor herself and years of working with former NFL players in the NFL brain injury lawsuit and being aware of CTE, we knew he had at least been exposed to brain trauma. Upon receiving the medical report of his brain autopsy, the neuropathologist indicated the signs of Paul's CTE weren't in the part of the brain she sees for boxers, hockey players, or soccer players. The protein tau had formed in a cluster, precisely where she would expect one in a football player. There were many times when Paul voiced his frustration of feeling left out. He once said to Mom after getting his DUI, "You fight for everyone else. Why can't you fight for me?" We gave up a lot to help our sister fight cancer. We gave up a lot to help fight for better safety standards in cheerleading and for my rights as an athlete. We gave up a lot to help fight for gas pipe safety. Where was Paul's crusade? His crusade comes now. Now that we know Paul had CTE, now that we know years of repetitive hits can cause degenerative brain damage, after years of Paul feeling like he wasn't a part of our fight to help youth athletes, in the end, we were fighting for him all along and didn't know it yet. Our mission is still the same. Our passion simply burns brighter than ever.